I'm. I want to talk a bit about the Bodhisattva ideal. Has everybody heard of? Well, no. Better question is: has anyone not heard of a Bodhisattva? Be really interesting to know. God, everybody's heard of the Bodhisattva. That's brilliant. Unless anyone's shy to say they haven't. Yeah. Well. So the Bodhisattva is it's a restatement, really, of the spiritual life, a later sort of restatement of the spiritual life, which makes explicit the altruistic dimension of the spiritual life. So the Bodhisattva seeks to gain enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. That's the little sort of shift. Normally, Buddhists are just trying to gain enlightenment, but the Bodhisattva ideal sort of restates that as gaining enlightenment, striving to gain enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. I must admit, I found it a little bit hard to know quite how to go about that in practice myself, and I wanted to just share in a way some of my explorations around that. What does it really mean to strive to gain enlightenment for the benefit of all beings? I've too easily sort of taken the Bodhisattva ideal to mean that there should be more things that I'm doing that I'm not doing. Rather, there should be more things. I should be doing more things that I'm not doing. I should be sort of saving the planet, and I should be doing this, and I should be doing that. And before long, it becomes a kind of totally impossible feat. Anyway, you may not have had that problem, but all too easily, I've seen the Bodhisattva path as I've made it into something that's utterly impossible for me to get involved with, and that doesn't quite seem the point. So yeah, I want to just talk about a definition that Sangharakshita gives of the Bodhisattva, which I found very, very helpful in understanding how I can engage with this. I've always found it an inspiring element of the Dharma, I'd add, but how actually in practice do we strive to gain enlightenment for the benefit of all beings? That's been the question for me. So firstly, the Bodhisattva, in a way, one translation is the ideal Buddhist. There are sort of 4 different levels on which that are identified as bodhisattvas. One is just ordinary consciousness. So this is a bit puzzling, isn't it? But just our ordinary consciousness is thought of as bodhisattvas. I'll come back to kind of why later. But Buddhism talks about ordinary consciousness, uses the term vijnana. So vijnana gets translated as discriminating consciousness or divided consciousness. So what's being got at here is that actually, whilst we believe largely that we just perceive sense data sort of directly, that's not what's going on. Actually, part of the mind is kind of constantly categorizing in order to make sense of our sense data. You know, the thing about how some people can't differentiate between men's faces and women's faces. Well, that's the sort of categorizing that's intrinsic to ordinary consciousness. So actually, without that sort of categorizing, that discriminating element to our ordinary consciousness, we can't make sense of just our sense data. So yeah, that's what's going on with ordinary consciousness. We're constantly sort of categorizing to make sense of our experience. And we do that with our sense experience. We do that with ourself and our place in the world as well. So it's also translated as divided consciousness. So what this is getting at is that we draw a line distinguishing what we identify as self from what's other. That's what we actually do. And in that way, we divide what we identify with from what we don't identify from. And that's those are fundamental categories in our experience. We, as I say, we just think that we're seeing things as they are. We think it's just reality. But actually, it's something that we create. It arises from this kind of categorizing of experience. So divided in that sense. So that's our ordinary consciousness. That's, yeah, the kind of consciousness that we're in probably most of the time. And then the next level of bodhisattva is someone who is deliberately trying to develop their consciousness. So this might be called the trainee bodhisattva, someone who's kind of trying to grow. And essentially what this level is that you realize, you are aware of vijnana, you are aware that actually you are creating your experience of self and world, that actually the mind is kind of creative, not just sort of receptive. It's actually creating our experience. And furthermore, because you see that you're really creating your experience, you can work to create it in a more kind of helpful way. So what particularly we see is that our volitions, i.e. our emotions, what drives us to act, our intentions, our urges, kind of configure our experience actually of self and world. They kind of reconfigure it. So if we act on the basis of generous impulses, then we start to experience this distinction, this sort of barrier between self and other. We start to experience that in a much more permeable kind of way. We experience, if you like, self in a more sort of expansive, more connected kind of way if we act on those impulses. So we start to see in this second level that actually we're creating our experience of self and world. And similarly, if we act on mean impulses, our sense, that sort of barrier, that identification kind of contracts and even hardens. We experience ourselves as much more isolated, disconnected. Our thoughts are much more sort of self preoccupied, much less, we're in a sort of less expansive state. So we're seeing at this second level that actually it's our volitions that sort of configure our experience of the world. We create actually our experience of the world. And then the third level of experience that's called a bodhisattva is what you might call bodhisattva consciousness, not just a trainee bodhisattva, but a wholly new kind of consciousness. So that is from practicing at this second level, increasingly you start to see that these categories of self and other that we don't just see in a pragmatic way that, we're two different people, similar in some ways, but different than others. It's not that sort of pragmatic thing. We actually see ourselves as sort of fixed and separate. Those are the categories that we actually perceiving. So this isn't metaphysics. This is not metaphysics. This is actually direct experience. This is how we perceive the world. I'm not talking about some sort of abstraction, some sort of theory about experience. This is actually how we perceive. You can see it. If you look into your mind, you can investigate it. So with practicing at this second level, you increasingly see that what you think is real, this discrete and separate self and other, isn't actually real. It's not actually real, it's imposed. So this third level, bodhisattva consciousness, is consciousness that's freed from that imposed framework. Consciousness kind of completely free of that. So the bodhisattva, instead of experiencing an identification with self and not with other, experience an equal sense of identification with self and other. That's a kind of simple way of putting it, but that's a sort of very radical shift in consciousness, a consciousness that naturally identifies with all beings. So that's the third level of consciousness of bodhisattvas. Actually, the fourth level is archetypal bodhisattvas, but I'm not going to say anything about those. But with those three levels, we end up with a sort of path, and you can see how becoming a bodhisattva certainly would be for the benefit of all beings. So kind of free consciousness from any sense of sort of self-preference is bound to be of benefit. But in a way, that's still talking about the development of an individual consciousness. And it still sort of leaves me sort of feeling like, yeah, but what about me? And how does actually me trying to live the bodhisattva path, who hasn't, got to that elevated level of consciousness, really, how is it really altruistic? I found this definition, Sangharakshita's definition, really, really helpful in this respect. So his definition is that a bodhisattva is someone who has adopted an attitude in which the terms self and other have become meaningless. In doing good to yourself, you do good to others. In doing good to others, you do good to yourself. Yeah, so that's the definition, or most of it. Bodhisattva's someone who has adopted an attitude in which the terms self and other have become meaningless, so that in doing good to yourself, you do good to others. In doing good to others, you do good to yourself. So that needs a little bit of unpacking, doesn't it? So yeah, first of all, this thing about doing good, it's not just talking about taking your vitamins sort of level of doing good. It's talking about your ultimate good. What is to your ultimate good? What actually conduces to the unfoldment of your potential as a human being? It's good. It's doing good in that sense. And then similarly, sort of doing good to others. What conduces to their full unfoldment? What else needs saying? So yeah, this bit about adopting an attitude in which the terms self and other have become meaningless. I don't think that is sort of massive, talking about a level of experience that's massively beyond us, actually. I think what that's talking about is it's kind of saying that that you can approach spiritual life through these two frames, either doing good to yourself or doing good to others. And if you go through that window, what you encounter is the same, actually, as what you encounter if you go through that window. For example, if you really want to do good to yourself, well, you need to develop self-awareness. If you develop self-awareness, really you need to also develop generosity, an outward concern for others. Otherwise, your self-awareness, without any movement towards others is just ends up in self-preoccupation, which isn't to your benefit. Yeah. And you also need to, if it's your full unfoldment, you need to develop a perspective of what really is to your benefit. Okay, so if we go through the other window, doing good to others, well, you're not going to do any good to others if you're not aware of what's, aware of them, aware of their needs. Yeah, so you need to develop awareness. And to respond to their needs, you need to develop generosity. But then you also, if you're going to do others good to any ultimate degree, you need to have a wisdom perspective. Do you see what I mean? So I think that's what's being said. But let me just explore a few examples of this, because it is probably still a little bit theoretical. But I think it's a really, really interesting way of thinking about the bodhisattva. You move into something where the terms self and other don't quite stand up, actually. Anyway, yeah, some examples. So perhaps one example that came to mind is the example where really you're just trying to do good to self. So it happens not infrequently that someone on a course learning to meditate kind of comes along and they've had a really bad week, and you can see there's a bit of resistance to really saying that, and then they sort of break, as it were, and they say, oh, actually I had an awful week. I was trying to meditate, and then this happened, and then I was feeling all this anger or whatever it is, and they feel like they're just doing, they clearly sort of feel like they're just doing what they said they do, turn up to the course and trying to benefit themselves. But everyone else in the group kind of is really affected by the honesty. It's really, really touching to see. And actually what this person is doing is really helping the other people in the course engage more sincerely, more honestly. It affects their motivation. So there you've got an example of someone who's just trying to do their best to kind of do themselves good, but actually they end up really benefiting other people unwittingly. Yeah. So another example where it's not unwittingly, an example of when you offer to support, you ask to support a course, and you this is me asked to support a course. Week 1 great, week 2 great, week 3 great, week 4 oh god, I said I'd support the course. I don't want to. I just want to watch a video, and there I am kind of thinking, oh god, I've got to go over the centre. This doesn't happen these days, but it did. And so I turn up, sort of drag myself along, and engage with the course. And then at the end of the evening, I realized, oh God, I didn't want to do this. I didn't. God, that is mad. I just absolutely loved the evening. Way better than watching a video. But I sort of forgotten myself in the process, and forgotten that I even sort of didn't want to do it until that point. So suddenly, begrudge. I'm not doing something for my own good, at least in my own sort of according to my own ideas. I'm doing something for other people's good, and it ends up being to my benefit, really to my benefit. I'm in a much, much better state by the end of it. So that's another example. So first one's unwittingly helping others when you're trying to help yourself. The second one's unwittingly helping yourself when you're trying to help others. And then another example was just actually on New Year's retreat, which was a lovely retreat, really, really lovely retreat. I was quite moved by it. That lovely moment, that lovely sort of experience where somehow, unaccountably, everybody seems to sort of get what they need to flourish. Suddenly, everybody's just growing. It's really, really sort of moving experience. There's no sense of sort of conflict or tension or things not working out for people. Everybody just sort of growing. But I was at a point quite stretched by the retreat because there's lots to do, and I was just trying to make sure that I supported everybody on the team and stuff. And I was feeling a little bit like, well, there's no space for me, is there? So I sat down. There's no space actually even to prepare kind of the teaching. So instead of sort of rushing into preparing the teaching, I just sort of sat down and sat with it, and just explored the experience in terms of, okay, well, I'm sort of here trying to do good to others, and feeling this growing sense of tension. But just relaxing into it, I realized, no, actually, this is doing good to me. There was a kind of just an emerging sense of sort of tenderness, a sort of responsiveness to other people. It was changing me, just being more concerned with other people. And actually, then I realized my sort of slight anxiety about not getting enough time to prepare was just ego. It was just sort of, oh gosh, this might all fall apart. And that just sort of dissolved into this sort of responsiveness to other people. So actually, it was sort of, I was just sort of trying to support other people, and then sort of discovered that I'm actually sort of developing myself, if you see what I mean. So I think you can see with these examples, the more you have these sorts of experiences, the more you can see that if you do good to self, that is also sort of necessary to actually benefit other people. And actually benefiting other people actually is going to do real good to you. And the more we see that, the more that can become part of our motive. Yeah. So there you are, sitting down to meditate, thinking, oh God, I've got to, work on my mental states. Well, no, actually, instead, you could be sitting down to meditate. The more and more you see this sort of, what might you call it, sort of reciprocal nature, you can really sit down to meditate and think, I'm going to do this for other people. This will actually have an effect for other people. Yeah. And similarly, you can sort of benefit other people, knowing that it's really going to be to your deeper unfolding. So I think that's more what the Bodhisattva ideal is getting at, that you can see that more and more convinced we are from experience of how what's really to our benefit is looking after other people as well as looking after ourselves. That is the spiritual life. It contains both. If we let one drop off, then we've got an unbalanced spiritual life. Our spiritual life won't work. If we let the other drop off, exactly the same. So you can see, can't you, how it's possible to adopt an attitude in which actually our motive no longer really sort of can be contained within the idea that I'm doing this to benefit me, or that it's can be contained within I'm doing this to benefit others. We actually sort of, our attitude, our motive is more inspired than that. It's more, I don't know quite how to put it actually, but it doesn't, those terms don't make any sense anymore. I think that's what's really being got at with the Bodhisattva idea. But we have to sort of engage with it. We have to explore it. We have to go, let's have a look actually at my experience. If I do good to self, what effect does it have on others? If I do good to others, what effect does it really have on self? So that's what I think's being kind of got at with the Bodhisattva ideal. And the two are sort of mutually augmenting. Yeah. So if you engage with life in this sort of way, then sitting down on the cushion has an augmentative effect on how much you're able to sort of help other people, which then has an augmentative effect on how much you want to sit on the cushion, sort of thing. So isn't that a really, really inspiring kind of vision of spiritual life? I find that find that really, really inspiring. Anyway, I found that helpful in terms of actually how do we engage with how in practice do we strive to gain enlightenment for the benefit of all. And you can see how actually the two are not really separable in truth. So yeah, this second level of kind of reconfiguring self, we're changing through practicing, we change ourself, but we also equally well are trying to do good to others. So I guess another way of talking about that, way Sangharakshita's has talked about that, is the creation of a new kind of society. And you see how if you're really trying to do good to others, you're changing your relationship with them, they're changing their relationship with you and with other people. You can see how you could talk about that, think about that in terms of the creation of a new kind of society. So what I find interesting about this is that I wonder if that's actually a more complete way of talking at times about what we're trying to do with the spiritual life. I wonder if talking in terms of creating a new kind of society is actually more complete. It takes into account both sides, both these frames, because in a new kind of society, well, you have to live in it, don't you? So if it is going to be a new society, it's only going to be new to the extent that you meditate and you practice ethics and you practice generosity. And so it includes you in new kind of society, but it also necessarily expands out from you, doesn't it? So that's what I wanted to just sort of explore a bit, actually. Is that in some ways, I mean, we probably need lots of different models for how we talk about the spiritual life, how we talk about growing the Dharma life, whatever we call it. But I wonder if in some ways that's a more complete model in this sense of doing good to ourselves and doing good to others. It sort of contains both. So what I wanted to do actually is stop at this point and give you a chance to explore in your own experience. What ways do you think about your spiritual life? What are the sort of models or metaphors? Is it the path? Is it unfolding? Is it insight? What is it? What are the metaphors you use? And what ones best contain both these aspects? Maybe is the new society one that, creating a new kind of society, or at least creating the nucleus of a new kind of society. Yeah, so that's what I thought I'd do. And then I'd like to come back and talk about what are the sort of, what is this new kind of society? Actually, I kind of prefer the term open society myself, creating an open society in the midst of our divided society. But I want to talk about that afterwards. But for now, yeah, just if you turn and get into 3s and 4s and just explore, just for 10 minutes probably, just explore what are the paradigms of the spiritual life that you use and which ones best include both these elements. Right, so I'm just interested, were there any discoveries in that exploration? Anyone come up with some bright ideas? Or are you all just chatting about the football?
One really clear example we thought of was like just rejoicing in others.
Oh yeah.
There's just empathic practice that really highlights that everyone benefits from that, especially if
Oh,
you're
yeah.
doing it publicly and people can hear it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you feel good about it, they feel good about
Oh,
it.
yeah,
and they
yeah.
use it. Yeah, just the benefits of all.
Oh, yeah. 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 So you're identifying that as a practice that clearly sort of blurs the complete separateness of of good to self and so yeah. Great. Any other?
So we thought we hate talking in these little exercises. And that's a real discovery that the other person was exactly the same. And then we moved, we said, no, we don't join the 4 or 3, but we'll just do 2, because we'd already acknowledged that they're on the same wavelength. And you people are defined, they don't want to do the 3. So we solved the problem by our own selfishness.
That was exactly the point. Great, thank you for that. Great. Okay, obviously time to move on. Yeah, so I just wanted to yeah, I just wanted to raise that question, kind of how we think about what we're doing, because the sort of paradigm we give ourselves of the spiritual life is significant in itself, isn't it? How do we think about what we're doing? Yeah, I mean, as I say, this is a way that Sangharakshita talked about it. In a certain way, it's a sort of shift from thinking in terms of the attitude. That's how Sangharakshita talked about the bodhisattva, or about the path, adopts an attitude in which the term self and other become meaningless. Shifting from thinking about the attitude to thinking about the enterprise. What actually are we trying to do together? What are we trying to kind of create? So yeah, perhaps an interesting way to think about the spiritual life, the Dharma life, and I personally wonder. So there's ways Sangharakshita's talked about this. He's used the term the group, which I think is sometimes it's sort of helpful, and sometimes it leaves people a bit puzzled. But I wondered about sort of a divided society, that which we are trying to sort of transform, that which we're trying to move away from, a divided society, and we're trying to create the nucleus of an open society. So I just wanted to explore that a little bit. To clarify kind of what we're talking about a bit more in terms of what kind of society. Yeah, this what we're trying to move away from, this sense of a divided society. Well, that line that we draw, delineating a self, what arises inevitably when we do that is fear. Fear is an inevitable consequence, because we identify something as fixed and unchanging, which in reality is a process and arises dependently. So fear is inevitable. It's inevitable that self will be threatened by other. That is a kind of inevitability if we draw, well, when we draw that line, because we've already drawn that line. It's obviously not a conscious thing, is it? It's automatic. And then as a species, as human species, one of the ways we've dealt with that fear is to gang together. Is kind of safety in numbers, basically. And that's a very, very deep patterning for us as human beings. So that line gets drawn between us and them, inevitably. As we sort of club together, we gang together with a smaller group for kind of safety and security. But one thing we do when we do that is we kind of align with ways of thinking as part of our sort of participation within that that group. So what's going on at a deeper level here is that on the basis of fear, we're kind of joining with others. It's basically sort of safety in numbers, but it's not really safety, is it? It's a particular strategy. It's actually power. Numbers, because there's more of us than them. That's really sort of what's going on. So we're starting just by doing that, as we instinctively do, to create a society that's based on fear and power. Actually, that's the sort of basis of that society. And on that basis, what starts to happen is that the views we hold aren't actually concerned with the truth. They become sort of, if you like, sort of objects of power in a way, sort of almost sort of weapons. This is our view. These are the people that are of the same view as me, and you want that group to be kind of nice and big and have really strong arguments, a strong sort of discourse, so that you feel sort of safe. So you can see how within that sort of mentality, the truth is actually not that important. The important thing is that your narrative is kind of dominant. So this is what's happening, isn't it, in party politics, where we align with a particular view. It's not our view. We haven't thought it through. If we did think it through, we might actually start to disagree with it. Instead, we've sort of aligned with a particular pre-packaged view, and we do that on the basis of sort of safety in numbers. We do that out of sort of fear of standing alone. So that's the sort of old society that we're trying to create something else in the midst of. It's pretty sort of stark description of it, but it's somewhat recognizable, isn't it? And the kind of quality of that society is intolerance. You can't sort of quite sit with someone else's view, someone else's narrative, because it is inherently a sort of threat to your own. You're in this sort of power dynamic where either my discourse is dominant or yours. And you can see that on the radio. Sam Amati, a friend, was kind of pointing this out, where two people discussing, and they were utterly unable to find middle ground, because all that would do is sort of cede power. Instead, my argument needs to be sort of utterly infallible. It's a defense, it's a power, it's a sort of power game. And you get this kind of this sort of intolerance where, you know, people can't sort of sit in the same room, people can't sort of discuss views. What happens is very easily you instead of discussion, you get sort of slurring, social slurring, you know, that what was Swallow Brahman's, that the tofu eating wokarati. That's always stuck in my mind. You know, it's not a discussion about the point you're making. It's just a sort of slur. It's this kind of power dynamic where you are sort of excluded, slurred, and outcast from the group, and then perhaps, you know, on the other side, just perhaps within True Ratner, it's enough just to say right wing. You know, that's a kind of slur enough, because we're all so left wing. Yeah, so instead of discussion, you've got this kind of power game. It's just sort of more and more noticeable in society, isn't it? You can find yourself in one of those strange conversations where by someone that suddenly turns to you and say, well, what do you think? And so you try and say what you think, actually what you think. And they say, oh yeah, so you're one of them then. And you say, no, I don't quite agree with their point actually. And they say, well, you don't agree with me, so you must be. It's like you're in this kind of, you're either, us or them, and it's like, but isn't there another option there? Can I not be sort of exploring? And you can't. You're living in a world whereby you either vote for us or them. It's a sort of power game rather than a concern for the truth. And the thing about this is you can't really grow in that sort of environment. You can't really grow. So what an open society is about is trying to create a society that supports the growth and development of the individual. That as an individual, you can start to grow. And we need to create a society in which that is possible, because there's so much that sort of that works against that in the society, in our divided society. So in order to grow, you need to be able to act not from fear of what other people think, but act through really sort of seeing what you think, actually. What do you really think about the way you perceive others? What do you really think about the sort of urges that arise in you? If instead you're concerned about those things from the point of view of what other people think, that sort of sensorial, oh, I can't, I shouldn't feel that, and I shouldn't do that, and you can't really grow, actually. You need to be able to go, what do I really think? You need to feel free to really go, yeah, what do I think about this? This is how I see that person. What do I think about that? That's the only way we can sort of win our impulses over into our conscious willing. It's only if we can do that that we can start to sort of steer our impulses towards the generous, away from the sort of mean, away from the fearful. It's only through that that as individuals we can sort of take the courage to love and start to create a society that is based on love. So it's open in that sense, in that it's tolerant. We need a certain tolerance. And in Buddhism, tolerance includes criticism. It includes criticism. Like the English version of tolerance is, oh, you can't say that because they won't like it. But that's not the Buddhist version of tolerance. The Buddhist version of tolerance means you let people have their opinions, but you can also be critical because you want to get into genuine discussion. So that's what an open society creates. It creates an environment in which you can really explore so that you can discover what you do think. Just sort of not saying anything and not criticizing others doesn't necessarily help you do that. Yeah. So it includes tolerance, includes criticism in the Buddhist meaning of the term. So yeah, that's the kind of society that we kind of mean by an open society, one that genuinely creates an environment in which people can grow. So one way Sangharakshita talked about this was the positive group. So we're still creating, in a way, a group, because actually we need support, don't we, to grow as individuals, to start to really see ourselves not as fixed entities, but actually kind of growing and changing. We need the encouragement, support of other people. So he talked about a kind of a positive group. So that's another way of talking about this open society. And just to finish up, I guess partly the point here is that actually, until much further along the path, our tendency is to contract into a sort of fixed self. We're always sort of contracting back into a sort of fixed position, a fixed, identifying with a particular way of thinking about things, a particular identity grouping or gender or sexuality, whatever it is. So what is it that keeps an open society open, or a positive group positive? And what it is what Sangharakshita called true individuals, people who are sort of emancipated from those group tendencies of fear. That is what the order are aspiring to do. All order members kind of are aspiring to become true individuals. So one of the qualities of a true individual is that you have a direct experience of reality as it is, freed from that sort of dualistic kind of framework of self and other. That's what all order members are kind of committed to. So something that is beyond identity, essentially, completely beyond identity, beyond self and other. It's that, and only that kind of can ensure that a positive group, an open society, sort of remains open, because it's not sort of reliant on any sort of merely rational understanding, which can always sort of lead us into conformity. So yeah, we need a kind of, in order to keep an open society, or the nucleus of an open society in a divided society, we need a real Sangha. We need the influence of a real Sangha. That's what order members are aiming to do. We don't all manage to do it, but hopefully someone at least has a kind of direct experience of that at any one time. So lastly, what we're really trying to create, therefore, with Sangha, with an open society, it also has this sort of reciprocal aspect whereby creating Sangha or an open society, we do something good for ourselves, but it's also something that is good for the world. So this is the point about that first level of bodhisattvas, that actually all beings, what you're trying to see in a Sangha, you're trying to see, or as a bodhisattva, you're trying to see all beings in their potential. So you're trying to see that all beings have that potential to become bodhisattvas. So it's in that sense that first level, all ordinary consciousness, are bodhisattvas as well. And that's, if that's the case, then creating Sangha, creating an environment where those individuals can grow and develop is a benefit for the world as well. So it's in that sense that Sangha has this sort of mutual or reciprocal kind of benefiting of us, and then also the world